Okay, let's get back into WebStorm here. And then our first modification is to change the pin number on our LED device to point to the new pin, number 11, that we'll be using for this set of demos here. So we'll save that, and we'll just do a quick test to make sure that our pin number is set up correctly and that our wiring is done correctly. And we'll go ahead and kick that modification off with node.js, communicating on COM3, and working, and there it is blinking again, just like we saw at the end of the first demo. Now that we know that everything is set up properly, let's go ahead and kill this demo and switch back on over to WebStorm to do something a little more interesting with this LED. So we're going to go ahead and wipe out the body of this function to give us a clean slate. And instead of toggle or turn on, turn off, we're going to use the brightness function here. And what this allows us to do is set the brightness of that LED. Now this takes a number anywhere from 0 there to 255. Now passing in 0 essentially equates to 0 volts, and 255 equates to 5 volts, so we're going to set it right in between, which should equate to about 2.5 volts. Now we're going to switch back on over to PowerShell here and execute our changes, and the expected output is that LED should be about half lit. Now it's kind of hard to tell in the camera shot there, but the LED is dimmer than it was when we simply just said turn on, and that's because turn on set the value of the pin to high, which essentially equates to sending about 5 volts to the LED. Now there are a couple of things I want to point out when we use the brightness function. The first is that if you ever need to know what the brightness value is, since maybe you set it via a sensor value instead of hard-coding like that, you can call the current brightness function on your LED, and this simply returns the value of the brightness. Now the other thing to note is that there is an isOn function you can use to determine the state of the LED. And the reason I'm pointing it out now instead of earlier is because there's a little gotcha when using this function after setting the brightness. So let's go ahead and run these changes to see what the output of these functions are. Okay, so let's look at our output here. Now the brightness is 127, just like we expected, but what's up with that false for the isOn flag? I mean, clearly we can see that our LED is on, but this is saying it's not. Why is that? Well, it turns out that the state, on or off, is maintained with a local variable anytime turn on, turn off, or toggle is called. So even though setting the brightness essentially turns the LED on, it's not reflected through the isOn flag because the brightness function does nothing with that state variable used by the other functions. I'm honestly not sure if this was intended, which I can see how it might be intentional, but it could also be a bug too. Regardless, I just wanted to point that out in case you run into it later on. So if setting the brightness doesn't set the isOn flag, then we'll have to use the turn-on function to actually set that flag. So we'll go ahead and add that in just above the first log there and right below the brightness level. Now you might be thinking, hey man, isn't this redundant? I mean, because setting the brightness turns the LED on, so isn't turning on just turning on an already on LED? My answer is yes, and that was a lot of ons. However, I want to demonstrate another gotcha here when you use these functions in conjunction with each other. I'm going to log the brightness twice here so that you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to switch back on over to PowerShell here and execute these changes so we can see the output. Alright, now you can see two brightness values of 127, but you can also see our on flag is now true, which is expected. The thing I want to point out is that the second 127 is misleading because it's not actually what the brightness of the LED is over there in the camera shot. Again, it's hard to tell, but the LED is fully lit now instead of dim like it was when we just simply set the brightness. The turn-on function sets the pin value to high, which again equates to about 5 volts, so seeing a brightness value of 127 after the turn-on function was executed is a bit misleading. Again, not sure if this was intentional, but it's basically the same explanation where the turn on, turn off, and toggle functions don't do anything with the brightness setting behind the scenes, just like the brightness didn't do anything with the isOn flag. So if you use these in conjunction with each other, you may get misleading results depending on the order in which you make the calls, as we'll see here in just a moment. Alright, let's clear this out and then switch back on over to WebStorm, and I'll show you that if we reorder the calls, we can get the desired output that we're looking for. Alright, let's clean up the logging statements here, and then we're going to move the brightness call down to after the turn on statement there. Yes, again, this is redundant, as the brightness statement will turn on the LED at the specified value, but I just want to show you that you can achieve the desired output here. I'll throw in one more brightness logging statement here to further prove that the turn on statement does not impact the brightness. We'll switch on over to PowerShell and execute these changes, and I'll make one final point about these gotchas before moving on. You can see the first brightness value is 0, even though we turn the LED on with turn on, so you might think it should be 255 instead. But again, turn on has no impact on the brightness. You can also see that the remaining logging statements do display correct values, so they can be achieved through the ordering of calls like this if you want complete accuracy on all the variables. However, it's a little silly to use the turn on statement and then immediately set the brightness, as the call to brightness alone will suffice.